Hey guys, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning, here tonight to chat about this new Shame album, Drunk Tank Pink. Shame are a group of South London-based post-punkers who a couple of years ago, honestly, really blew me out of the water completely with their debut album, Songs of Praise. This album, to me, sounded like a tea kettle that had been left on the stove for like 30 extra minutes, just ready to explode, and it finally did, and it was just so grimy and full of energy. Honestly, on top of all that, it just had this dirtiness to it, and to me, most importantly, it brought back a real sense of danger to the world of post-punk. It ended up becoming one of my favorite albums of the year. And honestly, it's done nothing but grow on me ever since. Which I could say a lot about the singles too, which going into this album, I was kind of all over the place with. I was super psyched to see what Shame was going to do next to follow up Songs of Praise. However, a lot of the singles leading up to this actually disappointed me at first, until I got around to listening to a lot of this album, and let me just say, 2021, 2 weeks in, and post-punk is looking good. The album starts off with Alphabet, which, honestly, I hated when I first heard. This, to me, did not have the sonic boom qualities of tracks like Concrete. However, this track actually offers some really interesting, introspective thoughts on education and mind control and all sorts of other interesting topics. It's a wild intro, but I think what's most interesting about this is, honestly, Shame are a completely different band than they were 3 years ago. It's much more thought out sounding. It's very streamlined as well. I wasn't into it at first, but I'm into it now. Nigel Hitter, on the other hand, brings in some art punk vibes, maybe even some dance punk grooves. Like, if you're a fan of, like, maybe old school Wire, yeah, this isn't the same, but it's definitely something you're going to want to keep an eye on. And honestly, Shame do it justice. They end up working this groove so well. The grooves on this album are pretty awesome. And the pop, pop, pop chorus is just so simple, but very memorable and effective. It's certainly not the album I expected, but I think that's a good thing. Born in Luton, as far as a deep cut goes, might be the best track here. I love the very jagged, cutting riff that just dominates through so much of this track. It's just so anxious and rushed sounding, which in a post-punk sound is really just right on the money. As a matter of fact, I could say that a lot about this entire album. But this track just has so many great contrasts to it. More spacious, very airy chorus is just such an awesome moment of release. Not to mention, we get some of the most emotional bars here. I think it adds a lot of levity to this album without taking away the real bite of it. And you know what? It might be one of the longer tracks here, but honestly, it makes me want to return to it a lot more. I feel like I can learn a lot more from it and discover so many little details to it. I love this. Now, overall, this is a very old school art punk and dance punk album, maybe even old school post punk as well, but it doesn't get much more so than on March Day. Doesn't come off as a cheap imitation though. As a matter of fact, it's a really nice nod to this era of these genres. It's a very sharply written, tasteful throwback. Love the hypnotic, repeated chorus of I can't get up, I won't get up. But I think the real story behind this album stays the same. I was going into this album ready for another kettle boiler like Songs of Praise, but this is not it. But that is not a bad thing. This is very exciting. I'm shocked at just how much Shame has matured and really narrowed down their thoughts and really got them out on paper a lot better. If I really had to choose one track here that I'm not into, it's 6-1. It's another super tense, groove-heavy jam, but it's also the most underwritten track here. I'm not too crazy about the productions or the vocal mixing here either. This, to me, just seems like a backstep. Water in the Well, on the other hand, is, pound for pound, I think, the best track here. It just got so much punch to it. It is so raw sounding. It's got that art punk flair, but it is just so sharp. And honestly, as far as a performance from Charlie Steen goes, don't look any further than this. This is his most raw and explosive one here. It's also got this great release towards the end with these fantastic group vocals. It's one of the best tracks that Shame has ever written. And Snow Day is one of the most interesting tracks here. This is a serious left turn for the band, and unlike nothing that they've never touched. It's very progressive and shows them thinking outside the box. All of these things I've never really been able to say about Shame, even though I've enjoyed their work. But Charlie's very brooding, intense vocals here bring that danger back in from Songs of Praise. This is fascinating, and I'd love to hear more in this light. It's just so chaotic and wild, and honestly almost reminds me of like The Lick from Songs of Praise. Anyway, great track. Human for a Minute is once again not as combustible, not as throttling, but it is just as intense in its own way. It once again has that element of danger to it, but it's also strangely lonely sounding, which plays out in its lyrics. Like the title suggests, it shows Shame being more human than ever. And not for nothing, in a really weird way, the sentiments behind this track are really sweet. And Great Dog, on the other hand, is honestly the direction that I thought that most of this album would go. It's much more chaotic and wild sounding. And I don't hate it. I even think they've matured with this sound. The songwriting on this track, as wild and off the rails as this track gets, it's still very sharp. Harsh Degrees, on the other hand, is one of the most angular sounding tracks. Like, this track does not sit still for a minute. It is constantly unfolding and refolding itself. It is tough to grasp. Not only that, but pair that with the intensity of the rest of this album, and you've got yourself something pretty heady, but something pretty awesome at the same time. Not to mention, that chorus here is one of the best on the album. And Station Wagon, as a finale, just continues to give me so much hope for this band. It's dark and it's brooding, but it also has an artsy side to it. It is easily the most vast sounding track here. I mean, it's dangerous sounding, but there's also moments of hope to it. It's sort of grim and grisly at times, but there's also moments of maturity. It kind of sums up a lot of the themes of this album all at once. I know that kind of sounds cliche for a finale, but it's the truth. So, you know what? Drunk Tank Pink is not the album that I expected going into it for Shame. Honestly, I was expecting a much more raw, vicious, explosive, and concise album, much like their last album. However, the fact of the matter is, they have matured in the last few years. They have grown up. They have sharpened their songwriting techniques. They have really embraced a lot of their influences as well from very mature, introspective, but just as wild and artsy post-punk album. We're 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, into 2021, and post-punk right now is looking great. This album is awesome. I am feeling a very strong 8 on this album, but let me know what you guys think down below. If you like the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, guys.